Hi everybody, this is Kate Pinvari, Marketing Coordinator at Richey Co. I will be helping field in questions on this webinar. Thank you everyone for coming out today and joining us. Each of our presenters will be introduced to you shortly. Just a few housekeeping items. Everyone joining the webinar today is on mute, so if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them in the questions panel or in the chat. I will field them to our presenters and we will save those towards the end to answer if we have time. If we don't have time to answer those questions, I'll make sure to get your information and your question passed along, and we will start an email string with you and the experts who can answer that question for you. Today's webinar is being recorded, so if you need to jump off for any reason, we'll send the video recording and slide decks to everyone so you can review what you have missed or have it for reference. So that will be available. I'll distribute it in the next few days. Please feel free to pass it along to anyone you may think it could benefit at your organization. There will also be a short survey that comes your way after the webinar. Just 2 yes or no questions, nice and simple. So we would really appreciate that if you could follow up with that. If you think of any questions or comments after the webinar today, feel free to contact Steve. His info will be on the last slide. So to kick off our presentation, we have Felicia Mollison, Chief Marketing Officer, to introduce our series and speaker.
Thanks so much, Kate. And thank you all for joining us today on our next edition of the Capital Education Series presented by Richey. Steve couldn't be with us today. You'll have his contact information at the end. But I just wanted to take a moment to talk about capital education and why it was so important to Richey. We developed this series during the pandemic when it was impossible for folks to get together or even have access to capital. And at the end of the presentation, you're going to see some of our next highlights. This is a year-long program. And we invite you to come back. If this is your first time, welcome. If you've been on some of our other ones, thank you so much. And we hope that you get a lot out of today and today's speaker. One of the things that's really important as you're looking at raising capital is obviously understanding your marketing plan and how you're going to communicate that. And today we have one of the best in the business, Holly Singer from HS Marketing. Holly, I'm going to give you a moment to introduce yourself. I just wanted to say thank you in advance to Holly for putting together this program, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Holly Singer. First, a big shout out to my co-speaker, Felicia Mollison, and Steve Vlasic for inviting me here today, and to the whole Richey team. I know you guys put on a first-rate program, and I'm just delighted to be a part of it. So first, a big thank you for this opportunity to join you today, and hopefully leave people with some insights and actionable ideas. And what I don't leave you with, I'm happy to answer separately. So again, my name is Holly Singer. I run a niche marketing communication firm. We are focused entirely on the alternative investment space. We've worked with about 150 or so clients among managers and various investment niches, allocators and service providers, helping them with their marketing collateral, some communication strategy, some PR, and answering lots of questions.
Thanks so much, Holly. And for those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Felicia Mollison, and I come to Richey from a background in lots of regulated financial environments. That's what Richey does for audit, tax, and consulting services. We go deep into financial niches, and on behalf of the alternative investment team, again, thanks so much for being here. So you're gonna have 2 marketers kind of navigate, and we're trying to get a lot of tips and traps for you, and we're also trying to get your questions. So please don't hesitate to fill up the chat, because that's what we really want to do. Marketers like to make it relevant. So please help us. We want to make this really custom tailored to you as we go through. But we're going to begin with the big picture. And Holly, I know that when we met, these are 3 words that, or 3 phrases that each of us really resonated with. Could you take a moment? This is kind of your mantra as you work with clients. Could you share with us what these 3 phrases really mean to you?
Sure. Thank you, Felicia. I'd be delighted. And again, I'm just going to have some time for sound bites, and then we'll try to dig a little bit deeper. So kind of taking it from the top holistically. So your marketing deck is not your whole strategy. It's not your whole marketing toolkit. So think holistically. Take a big picture, a big view of how you're going to raise capital, how you're going to communicate with investors. Remember, even with your ongoing investor relations program and your year to year communication needs, you're still marketing. You're trying to convince those existing clients to stay with you. You want loyalty, you want referrals. So think holistically about how you not only raise capital, but keep that capital, because we all want it to be sticky over the years. You need a strategy. So again, it's much more than just thinking we get a one cap intro event and voila, we've raised our capital. It really takes a lot longer, I think, than most managers envision.
Yes, you've brought up a couple of concepts, and as we go through, we're going to dig in deeper to those and really talk about kind of the tips of how you can do this without getting overwhelmed. We're very aware that everyone on this call is dealing with so many issues simultaneously. And what we want to do is kind of create those tips and avoid those traps of doing this. And I think you came up with this kind of a way that you talk to clients with these three elements because people were getting kind of stuck in one area and not really doing another. And I know when we met, and I would just want to say this for everyone on the call, when you see the words be creative, you're not asking people to think about like how well they illustrate or how well they write copy, correct?
Correct. And creativity is kind of that, overlap and mix between the art and the science of marketing. But it really all comes down to branding. So creativity is about, your brand. Who are you? How are you perceived? And branding is not, just putting yourself out there and having a great logo because you have a terrific graphic artist. That's one piece of the equation. But of course, it goes way beyond that. And I think we all need to be creative in how we brand ourselves. And honestly, the last year with the pandemic has required way more creativity. I mean, before 2020, who in the world would have thought we'd be meeting each other on Zoom and then having coffee and cocktails and lunches on Zoom? Creativity has become quite a mantra, and we have to really think about how we can brand ourselves effectively to establish trust and build
Right.
trust. That's what it's all about.
Right. And brand is, again, just much more than that logo. It's the sum total in your audience's mind of every single interaction with you. So let's start really where that begins. And it's that story, the telling of your story. And I know that, these can look like just, a few W's and an H, but this really, all these questions really come down to that authentic emotional story. Could you share with us why that's so important in your opinion?
Absolutely. So the W's and the H's need to converge, and taking it from the top, actually starting from the bottom, but then going right to the top. If you start with the bottom, the what, you lose that creativity and that storytelling and that big picture. So the why, again, it might sound kind of mushy-gushy, and it might sound like someone's asking you to, have an out-of-body experience and do something you're not comfortable with. But the why is, why do you do what you do? How did you get into this business? What's in your journey? How do you do what you do, and why is it important? And think about how we're humans. So investors aren't buying data points. It's great if you made a great rate of return, and they do need that data, but they're not buying those metrics. They're buying your skills, they're buying your alpha, they're buying your pedigree, your differentiation. And perhaps if you meet someone initially at hopefully a live networking event, you'll be able to share something very personal. So the why needs to kind of get like under your skin. And I think for a lot of people that's uncomfortable, especially if you're a portfolio manager and you're really great at, picking stocks or creating great returns, but to share something really personal about your life might not be your cup of tea, but try it. Maybe practice on someone first.
So you talk about that marketing is emotional and personal, and that's really because we're all humans. And that humans, since the beginning of time, have told stories. And stories are what people remember. They might not, they might remember that data point if it's extremely impressive, but what comes deeper is that emotional reason why you are doing what you're doing and why it's so personal to you. And one of the things that we talked about was, kind of that starting with why and really reflecting on what started this or why it's so passionate. And, can you talk a little bit about authenticity? Because I think that's what comes into it. It doesn't need to necessarily be, the be all end all story. It's just authentic to the storyteller. Is that something that you find that you're usually helping clients with?
Yes, indeed. I just go back to the difference between presenting your performance and presenting yourself as a person.
Right.
And the latter is, as you said, this is human to human. There's a lot of great, modern marketing tools out there, but we are humans and we need to really be careful that when we're interacting with prospective investors, they can get, kind of underneath, some of those, hard facts and understand, again, your journey. And there may have been an aha moment when you and your partner had a reason to organize your firm, or when you went from a 2-person to a 12-person operation, and why did that happen, and how did you get from point A to point B? How, when, why, and where were you? I think that investors, even though we need to be concise, that's another pet peeve of mine. Sometimes we get distracted with really long meandering stories, and we do need to be succinct, but those personal takeaways and those personal facts are part of that authenticity that you were referring to before.
Right, because obviously I think everyone can tell the difference when something is authentic and when it's not. So this story really is the essence of your brand. I think what we want to move into next, before we leave why, for everyone on the call, there's Simon Sinek's, if you haven't seen Simon Sinek and his TED Talk about Start With Why, it's also his books. All marketing begins with being able to tell that story and get at that essence of the brand. And that's really what we just talked about. You're more than just a logo and a name. You're this set of stories, and these questions can help you surmise that. But then we have to move, right, to where we actually use this, okay? And I know we're going to talk about each of these elements, and it can feel a little overwhelming, but it's really just the telling of a story in specific ways or channels, if you will. And when you think about your clients and some of the things that you've been asked, I know that a toolkit might sound like a lot, but really these are really critical items, aren't they, Holly?
I'm sorry. So we had 8 marketing collateral items here, and it is potentially overwhelming, and they are all necessary. Some may have already been created, some need elevation, some need updates and upgrades. I'm happy to kind of dive into any or all of those, Felicia.
Yes, I want to talk about them, but these really are kind of like, you have to have these. And usually we're really good at the top end of that, but we might not necessarily, that's one of those traps. So I want to talk through, we're going to look at it a little differently, but when you look at this list, where do you find usually that you have people that are not necessarily thinking that through? Where do you see people kind of missing some of these items? Is it like what their LinkedIn profile is, or maybe some thought leadership?
It's probably a little in each of these, so I'll just make a couple quick comments, as we go along. So, some firms haven't created a logo, and I've heard, I've heard comments like, "Oh, I'll do that in a couple of years when I have a bigger budget and I'm a little more established." But that's kind of a crazy time to just start on something that is really, sort of out of the box initial criteria. So, you know, and again, creating a logo shouldn't be like a, you know, Madison advertising agency, big budget, you know, extravaganza, but you need something. You need something that's professional and a good color palette that works across all of your marketing collateral. And I'm really a nut about consistency, visual consistency. So part of your visual branding is going to be that logo, and then it's going to be a color palette and key design elements. So it's best to have those established at the start. And the reason I say that is because when you get to items 2 through 8, all of those design elements should reappear. We don't want anything to be, you know, kind of haphazard. We want to look like we know what we're doing from day one. And even if we have multiple offices and multiple people who are out there sharing, it should all look like it comes from the same place. Just to talk a couple minutes on the deck, I've seen everything from, you know, like 10 slides to 60 slides. The ones that have 60, I call the boat anchor effect, and no one needs that, and investors aren't going to get through that level of material. So we really need to be succinct, kind of like 20 is a hard stop. And if we can do a 10 to 12 slide presentation, all the better. And we're not talking about teeny tiny, like document size fonts either. So sometimes it just needs a refresh. You know, the deck should really be nice and fresh and professional, and, you know, not look like it's been kind of like an old cranky thing that you pulled off of the shelf 5 years ago, and you just change the assets under management or the performance. It really should look fresh. Do you want me to just keep going? Or?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, just a quick thing on each. The tear sheet. Again, the tear sheet should look like the deck and the logo, and I may be stating the obvious, but I've seen so many examples of a complete visual disconnect. And then I'll ask someone and they'll say, oh, we didn't really think they needed to be the same. But what were you thinking? They do need to be the same visually.
Okay, so this goes back to that story. I'm sorry to jump in, but
yeah.
Why? Why do they need to look the same? And what are one of those traps when they don't look the same? Like, what happens to the audience?
There's a subliminal effect. When you send something out that looks really great, you've created a great impression. So every time you have outbound communication, you need to create that same impression and show the audience that you're in charge, you're a professional, and you've hired professionals. Not that, again, not that you're the artist, but that you've hired professionals, and that you create that same impression, and that they remember subliminally, oh, right, that's that, you know, that Richey May, they're really great. Everything I see from them is top drawer. You know, they have a really great marketing team, and it's all, you know, well written, great appearance. And so I'm working with a first-rate organization that Richey May knows what they're doing, because everything they send me has that high quality level. So that's part of the impression, and that's the branding, and that's how people perceive you. So it should always be at that, you know, you want to bring in your the first string. You don't want to be, you know, providing something mediocre. Just to kind of run through these quickly here, the website, everyone needs a website. Everyone looks up everyone on the web, and whether it's kind of an expanded business card that's kind of a placeholder, or an involved website, and I know we're going to get further into that area, you know, it's necessary to have one. You don't want someone to look up your, so here's the downside if you don't. Someone goes to your URL that's on your email, and they get under construction. Oh. Or they get, you know, nothing here, or, you know, they get one of these weird, you know, like Google or Firefox, some, template.
Just nothing, right? Just
nothing.
nothing.
They get nothing. They get no information. And unfortunately, the effect of that is to, instead of elevating your brand, you've actually decreased the quality of perception that you're creating for someone. Elevator pitch, I want to come back to that because that's your verbal presentation. Your LinkedIn profile, some people ignore that, but don't. So your logo goes on your LinkedIn profile. Your headshot goes on your LinkedIn profile. Don't be one of those people who has the like the ghost image on LinkedIn. Thought leadership, I want to delve into that a little further. DDQ, your due diligence questionnaire, maybe not out of the gate, maybe not in your early stages if you're an emerging manager, but certainly at the point that you were pitching to, you know, substantial family offices and fund funds, that's, you know, required.
So before we jump into those, each individual one, or, you know, the ones towards the bottom of the list, because they're so important and sometimes a trap that we get into, here's kind of the biggest trap, maybe. Because even marketers in other industries, okay, so it's not just what goes on in what the managers on the call have to deal with. There's a million things going on, but there's this tendency to, okay, it's done, I can walk away. Why is it so important that you treat these things as living objects and care and feed them so much? Why is that so important?
Well, Felicia, you took the words out of my mouth. Yes, your marketing tools are living, they're breathing, they're fluid, they're not like, you know, on a coat hanger in the closet, you know, with mothballs. And we need to keep them current. So why does it matter? The content needs to be fresh. I mean, think about going to a website, and this is this will be anonymous, but this is a real live example. I went to a website recently, a firm in our industry, and the news page had latest entry 2017. That's exactly. I cringed. Everyone should cringe at that. That's a long time ago. So everything needs to be fresh, whether it's your online, you know, profile in your website, on your LinkedIn profile. Like, what if you're at a different firm? And I've seen this many times. I'll be on the phone with the portfolio manager that we're talking about working together, and I've heard all about their business, and I'm looking at their LinkedIn profile, and wait a minute, it's from a totally different firm, because oops, they forgot. That's a big oops. So when should it be updated in real time? You know, if you change jobs, if you go to another firm, if there's been some rebranding for some reason at your firm, if you've taken on another role at your firm, it's time to update. So all your marketing tools should be fresh, current, whatever any of your, and it's not just your investors, but also your counterparties, your, you know, the people you work with, your prime broker, your attorney, your, you know, your fund admin people. They might be looking you up, or you might look to them for referrals, and you are what people see online, and when they receive stuff from you. So it all has to be current.
Right, back in the day when everything was printed, there wasn't this expectation of immediacy. You could get away with, you know, an annual update, or maybe even, you know, a quarterly update. But in today's world, everything being digital, I think there's such an appetite for, okay, what have you done for me lately? And that needs to really be new content on these channels, even if it's small. And I know we're going to talk about that in a second.
And just one other quick thing in terms of updating. So another effect that I've seen and heard very significantly from our, you know, pandemic experience that we've all been through is investors are demanding way more transparency. Well, what is transparency? It's not just facts, it's current facts. So that deep, call it a deeper dive. The emphasis on transparency and a deeper dive into what you do, which will be part of the due diligence, especially the operational due diligence. That whole realm of ODD demands very significant transparency. And the flip side for the marketers who are pitching or selling or presenting or communicating what they do, the upshoot there is that they need to be not only transparent but proactive in presenting those newly minted marketing tools. So if you gave someone your deck from a year ago and you have updated it, well, why wouldn't you give them your new deck? I've actually heard a lot of managers say, well, I gave out my deck and my tear sheet and all that stuff when I was first seeking capital. But you know what? You've updated information, so keep sharing it.
Right, which gives you a great reason to reach out to them again, right? So new content, we're going to talk about making that, but all these touch points create that story, make that story resonate over and over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's move to the biggest place that we see a trap with that when we talk about that word current, but it's those biggest digital channels, which are the website and the social media presence. So we're going to ask you to break this down separately. When we think about current, it's not just a posting about a subject. It's really about making sure that it's almost modern. And, can you share a little bit of the traps that you run into with some of your clients when people take a look at their website? One of the ones I know we discussed is people look at it on a desktop all the time and kind of evaluate it that way when they're looking at their own website. But do you find that on the go presence, people, are they using the desktop version of things? What do you see in the mobile world?
So good questions. I mean, a good question. I know that we've all seen how Google has prioritized certain elements of your website, which will tell people in a nanosecond if it's current. And one of those is exactly, Felicia, what you just said. Is it mobile responsive? If you're on your phone, which we all are, and you're going, you're clicking on a link and you open up a website and you can't really get around, it's probably ancient. So that's a dinosaur, and that's a problem. Or another quick giveaway on a website that's ancient is that it doesn't have the security certificate, the SSL. And so if you go to a site and Google or whoever your browser is says site not secure, don't go there, well, that's a dead giveaway. That site is old. So I would encourage everyone, whether you're a manager or whoever you are, if you have an ancient website, it's time to update it. If you don't have that HTTPS, if you don't have a mobile responsive design, and if you don't have content that's been created in the last, let's say 12 months-ish, but 3 and 4 years old, for your news page, that probably means your whole site is rickety. And it's time. And design-wise, so what's a current design? It should just be clean and fresh. I mean, I think we've also seen how, like, back in the day, and sites are obsolete way too quickly. But it's like writing with teeny tiny font size. I mean, most sites now, are more like a billboard. I'd just like to make one quick comment, because this is a trap on your on website development. Most users are only sort of like hanging on to a site very briefly, like seconds. And they're usually only on the first page. So we can all look up our Google statistics on our website. It's pretty easy to do that. And most users don't even get past the home page. So it needs to be big, bold, inviting, wow factor, or they're gone.
Right. And so maybe a good for everyone on this call is to look at their own website on one of these, and how much of that story is coming through on that homepage. How much of those key messages are available in a mobile design is a way that you can probably take a look at how am I using my website to get that most impact in today's world. But just having the content isn't enough. Because of what we do, we also have to be compliant. Can you talk a little bit about some of the traps that you see people fall into from a compliance side?
Well, compliance is a love-hate affair. My first advice is hug your attorneys or your compliance officers. Listen to them, solicit their, not ideas, but solicit their review. And please do that before your site is live, whether it's for the first time or if you're, updating, your site with a refresh and you're doing a relaunch. Please, please, I beg you to get that review just ahead of the game. So if you're a manager running private funds, I mean, there's just facts and circumstances that affect every manager differently, depending on their size, their state of domicile, their registration level, the type of fund they run. So you definitely need legal advice, which I don't give. I've just been around this business a long time, so I'm happy to share some feedback. But I'd say the big picture is, if you're running a private fund, unless your fund, this is a product specific regulation, unless your fund is operating under an SEC exemption called Rule 506C, that C is in Charles. C is in Charles is the general solicitation rule. We like that because if we have a 506C fund, we can embark on general solicitation, meaning your fund can be described on the website. Well, the grim reality is only about 3% of most funds that rule. So I encourage everyone to seek their legal advisors, let them weigh in on whether you can do it. If you don't have that 506C exemption for your fund, your website cannot name your product. Your product is your fund, your funds, your family of funds, whatever your product is. Your website should be a little more firm-centric, talk about your people, their pedigree. The content could provide thought leadership about the industry and trends and other things, but your product pitch needs to be in your marketing deck where you pre-qualify your investors.
Right, which isn't on the website. And parts
Correct.
of that.
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. Right. We don't put the pitch book on the website unless it's password protected. So quick bit of kind of advice to use that suggestion is most managers have a fund administrator who has a good portal, a tech portal, and it is password protected. So what we usually do is we just make a gateway from the manager's website to that password protected portal for all the rest of the marketing material.
Right. And that way you still have that nice cohesive. But one last thing about compliance in this relationship with our legal entities. Am I one and done there? How often do I have to make sure that I'm current from a compliance side?
Oh, great question. Well, if you've either grown your assets significantly, which enables you to be elevated from one category to another, your registration might change, and that may open some doors for different type of marketing. Or if you ask your attorney to adjust your fund registration from a 506B to C, and they complete that process, then your website would be compliant if it were updated to describe the fund. But a word of caution: don't use LinkedIn to promote your products. Your firm and you can be described, but you can't pre-qualify your investors on LinkedIn.
Right. Well, let's talk about social media for a second.
Okay.
You've talked a little bit about having that LinkedIn profile as a brand touch point, as a story touch point, and to make it, just much more than just a listing of jobs, and really think about how it can help you. But what are some of the traps that people can fall into when they look at social media in general?
So if you're a manager that's trying to promote himself or herself and use social media channels, first of all, I think LinkedIn is probably the most sort of business-ish and appropriate channel to use. So Facebook, Instagram, and others.
No TikTok? I shouldn't be working on my TikTok?
TikTok probably not for your fun. Maybe if your home recipes, but other things. I think that your social media, your use of social media channels is a great fit for thought leadership, but not to pitch your product. Think of social media as having a dialogue to engage with the users. So you could have a conversation with people, and that's LinkedIn posts are a great way to ask questions, comment on other people's information, just engage in dialogue and build some relationships there.
I love your use of that word, and that's what we're going to talk about next. When we think about verbal delivery and pitches and prepping for those moments, I know that you use the word dialogue a lot. So let's just start with kind of the basics, like the basic part of a verbal delivery. I know you said elevator pitch on that list of products, but what does that really mean to you?
Yes, I do consider an elevator pitch a critical part of the marketing toolkit. So what that means is once you've created the, back in the day when we printed everything, we could still call those items like print collateral, even if it's a digital print or it's being, uploaded to a secure platform or wherever it goes, for marketing, purposes and outbound communication. I think we all need to consider how we communicate verbally, whether we're on Zoom and having a virtual, initial meeting, or or live having a coffee with someone, or at a real event. The elevator pitch should be very brief. So if someone says to you, Felicia, it's been years, what have you been up to? And Felicia's thinking, wow, I just launched a fund. How do I put that information together very briefly? Hopefully, Felicia, I know you would be able to do this in a snatch. Hopefully you come up with something that's probably about 2 minutes, a quick description of who you are and what you do and why you're doing it. That would be a minimum elevator pitch. And what I often like to think of is these levels of pitch. So there might be a 2-minute, a 5-minute, and a 10-minute. And there might even be a 30-second to give someone almost like a tagline.
Right, a tagline, and really kind of working at that, W's and that H, really starting with that why and crafting that into something that feels authentic. Because, you say that about me, but the truth is, and I don't know if everyone on the call, if anyone feels this way, I'm in marketing, but I'm an introvert. So everything I've learned is that skill set. It's not my natural way, and it can be trained, correct? Like you can get better at being able to do these verbal pitches with more practice and some guidance.
Right, and I definitely think that the toughest road to hoe is for the folks that are more comfortable managing the portfolio than they are calling on clients and prospects. So it's hard, but I think that for those folks that are more in their sort of comfort zone with data calculations and methodology and that kind of stuff, I think that oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
it's okay.
I think that they're calling on all different lines here. Sorry. I think that the need to have something I would encourage you to have something pre-scripted, because honestly, if I'm used to pouring over spreadsheets and data sets to work on my portfolio, then my elevator pitch needs to be carefully scripted so that I know what to say and I can kind of commit it to memory. At least if I have to make like a prospecting call and I'm going to freeze on the phone, I'd rather have a script. So, preparations, like actors and actresses don't go on stage without a lot of prep and rehearsal.
So that is great for that soliloquy part of it, the stuff that I'm supposed to say. But you mentioned this word dialogue, which I think is so key. Can you talk a minute to everyone about why thinking about the questions that you'll ask or that dialogue is so important?
Yes, again, it's human to human, investors investing in people, not in data. So I would encourage everybody to have some questions for the investors. If you were, let's say, distressed investment specialist, ask someone maybe, how they feel about that sector, or if they're familiar with some, recent event or recent trend to kind of spark a conversation. So getting a dialogue, I think, is easier if you can ask someone to speak to an area that might be of within their purview or expertise. And certainly if you're in a specific sector that they're looking at, ask them some questions that they want to know.
Right.
Find out what they want to know and what their challenges are, because let's face it, if we're not offering if we as managers of portfolios and products aren't offering a solution for investors who have to allocate their assets, then we're going to have a tougher time. And it's
Right.
not just at the initial pitch, it's keeping that allocation in their portfolio.
Are there any common traps that you see people falling into in this area? Specifically, I'm thinking like at a cocktail party or somewhere where it's a little more social. Back in the day before I had certain skills, that would just give me so much anxiety of trying to do my elevator pitch in a social. Do you see any common traps that folks fall into at all in this area?
Sure. I think one of them is expecting that the audience or the person or group that you're trying to reach out to has way more time to listen to you than they really do. So I think a very easy trap, whether it's a quick cocktail party chat where you might have 2 minutes, or it's an initial meeting where you might have 20 to 30 minutes, the trap is expecting to have way too long. So if you go into, and I think I've heard this is very common, if you go into an initial meeting, like a speed dating, cap intro meeting, those are often 10 or 15 minutes. If you go into one of those, and usually a bell goes off when you have to rotate or move
Right.
on. But if, let's say, you go into a 15-minute slot with a 30-minute presentation prepared, you're way off the mark.
Right.
So that's a huge trap. So, be succinct, but more importantly, prepare in advance. You should know how long that time slot might be. And I also think that it would be a huge shame to just go into a kind of a social gathering expecting to just pitch before you get to know someone, because
Right,
that's
say hello. Yeah, that was what I tended to do back in the day, right? I'd be so nervous. Right,
right,
establishing that human connection is still important, no matter how long the elevator ride, right? Okay.
And whether it's a handshake or a fist bump or a elbow bump or whatever the post-pandemic reconnection is, I know, everybody's rusty at that, but I am hearing, and I really urge people to think about these things, because just yesterday I was on a call with a group and we were talking about the reintroduction, I'm going to say, of live events. And I am hearing that September and October are going to be different in terms of live versus just virtual events.
Yes.
Let's, just be ready. I mean,
yeah, let's practice. Okay, so talking about, what we talk about and being able to, enter a dialogue means that we do have to be looking at kind of the trends and thinking about this conversation at a bigger level, which can come down to thought leadership. And I know that when I use that term around here, it can sound a little daunting, but really it's almost as if, curation of things that are interesting to you can be interesting to your audience as well. Can you talk a little bit about why thought leadership is so important?
Sure. And I totally agree. It's not only important, but it's critical. So thought leadership is really, it's your knowledge base, it's your expertise. So to be a thought leader, you need some area of expertise. And if creating content in that area of expertise seems daunting, start by curating instead of creating. So curating is gathering other people's content, but be careful, be an editor. Don't just grab anything. So just some quick examples of that. I'll go back to a couple investment strategies, whether you're specializing in, distressed investing or crypto, or your global macro specialist. Everyone has some specialty, whether it's that specific sector or, long only versus long short. Everybody has something that they can offer. Otherwise, like, what, how are you going to succeed in the business? So use that edge judiciously, but use it as a way to communicate information that's not just pitching your product. So instead of every month, which you have to do anyway, you're going to reconnect with all your prospects and current clients with your investment performance to let your investors know. What I urge people to do is use thought leadership as it's a door opener, it's an icebreaker. So, if you're a specialist and like where the credit markets are going, or mortgage rate trends, or you're, in a position to talk about something in the economy or a specific industry, if you're a tech investor and you can talk about, what's happening with, the mobile phone industry or any area that you have specific knowledge, expertise, what that does is it enables you to become the go-to person, the expert in that space. And investors will start to come to you and they'll look forward to receiving your information that shares, what again we'll call thought leadership. It's some area of expertise that you can communicate willingly and succinctly too. I don't encourage anyone to send out huge white papers, because we're sort of in the YouTube generation where people like things that are quick. They love audio visual. But if you do write and you write well, short is best, less is more.
Right. And that lends itself to, it's actually doable. I'm sure everyone is doing this kind of research or scanning the news every single day. They're very connected, and it's really about realizing that sharing that and being able to think about what your audience is receiving from you is part of keeping everything current, correct? So if I'm doing this right, I should be then able to keep my website postings or my LinkedIn postings very current, correct?
Exactly. You can add blog content if you have that area of your website set up. Your LinkedIn posts don't have to be original content. Exactly. Like if you're following, people that you respect on LinkedIn and they're writing about trends in the industry, what I suggest, just to be a little more sort of, smart-minded, if you're sharing things on LinkedIn, what I suggest is don't just quickly kind of like click share without adding value. So what's your value proposition? Make a comment, like, thank the person who sourced it. First of all, that's always nice to do. It's just polite. And second of all, add something. You can add a comment, you could add a question, but add something of value.
Right, and dialogue is usually best coming from questions, so sharing it and then asking your followers, comment, how does this sit with you too? And just inviting that community feel, because then you'll get a lot of, instead of just reading, you can engage, which is always a deeper personal connection, if you can get them to quote unquote talk back versus just a soliloquy.
Right, again, right, dialogue.
Right, so great, okay. So I know we're getting to the end of time here. Well, not all of the end of time, but the end of our time together here. And, back to these 3 phrases of thinking about every touch point that are critical, that list of 8 that we had, and kind of thinking through that before you do anything, and being creative in how you solve that problem, not necessarily in thinking about how you can curate information. But as we wait, I know we have a few minutes left for some questions to come in. I'm going to get to that. I can see some questions coming in, but before we do, can you, after everything that we've just presented, what if you could just say, is there one thing that you would take away from this as an attendee? What would that be? That one thing to remember? about this?
Um,
We didn't rehearse this, everyone. This is, we didn't rehearse any of this, actually. We're very
so
good
whether
at
you're
talking these marketing
an
concepts, but
okay, so here we go. I'm on the spot, but that's fine. So whether you're an introvert or a comfortable extrovert, I would encourage you to act proactively. And what that means is don't just function on the responsive side in terms of investors asking you for information. You need to proactively share information. And part of that, this is sort of a part, I guess part B of that advice is don't forget to follow up. I have been at several industry conferences where allocators, large allocators, are asked about the traps that or the mistakes that they've seen managers fall into. And one of the ones, it sounds shocking, but one of the ones I've heard many times is that managers pitch and forget about them.
The follow-up after
Yeah.
that.
Don't
Yeah.
forget to follow up. And, sort of like, my mom taught me to write thank you notes. Well, here you go.
I will stay here for a second.
Thank you note and make sure to follow up. Don't forget about them. Make sure that everyone you meet in these cap intro, speed dating, events, hears from you after you meet with them. And even if you've had an exhausting action-packed day where you've had multiple back-to-back meetings, follow up with everyone.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. All right, so we have some questions coming in specifically about pitches. And not the big pitch, but those short pitches, the ones in the elevator rides. Let's talk about that. Do we have a template or guidance when you work with folks about how they can start to put that together? I know that when I work with people, I sometimes start with, this is just a regular sized elevator. We're not in the world's largest building taking 100, 200 floors. Let's get at that essence. But do you have some, consistent coaching points that you come back to, or a template, or how do you help people get into an elevator pitch?
Sure. As far as the template, I would say that every elevator pitch needs to cover 3 critical questions that you need to respond to meet investors' expectations. So whether it's a 2-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute, or more, who are you? Again, this is the qualitative side. Who are you as a person? Who are you as a firm? So number 1, who are you? Number 2, what do you do? Because they're a little different. The firm and the people are the who. The what is, what do you do? We manage 3 private funds and these 2 different strategies. What do we do? And the third, and don't ever lose sight of this, is what is your edge? It's easy to stop at number 2, but if investors are looking at, there's, let's say, 10,000 long short hedge funds out there, and you're one of 50 pitches that an investor has seen in some recent period of time, why would they not only potentially allocate to you versus another, but why would they call you back for another meeting? Like, immediately you need to think of, what is your edge? What's your value proposition? How are you different?
Right, and that's what connects to that why, correct?
Yes.
Yes, if you don't connect and start with that why, then it's really hard to make that edge as that third part, to that.
And that edge might be something really funky about your past. I lived in 7 countries and I speak all these languages, and I've been able to use that in my investing in emerging markets.
Right. Oh, that's great. Thank you. For any other questions that come in, we will make sure that we get those to Holly and we will send those answers back out. We just encourage everyone to think through, how we can help you with this. This is the whole point of how we're doing this today. But in reference to time, I want to make sure that we kind of show you what is also coming to you so you can remember, unless Holly, do you have any other closing comments? I know I made you do the one, which was awesome advice. Anything else that you want to share with the group as a closing comment?
Um, I'd like to encourage everybody to focus on trust. You know, we're in a super competitive business. I know that, you know, hedge funds have done really well in 2021 for the most part. Assets are flowing into the business, and that's great. And PE, funds are hauling it in, and so you have all the tailwinds that are helping you. But the headwinds are there too, and some of those headwinds, I would say sometimes we're our own worst enemy. So we need to kind of look in the mirror, see who we are, and think of what we can do to elicit trust. And Felicia, I know you at the very early, outside of this, talked about the word, authenticity. So authenticity is a huge factor driving trust. So, for example, don't promise someone a likely double-digit rate of return if you're in single-digit land, period.
Right.
It's just not worth it. If you set expectations, or you say, we're looking to be $1 billion fund in the next 18 to 24 months, and the likelihood of going beyond, let's say, 100 million is slim, there's just no point.
Right. No, I think that's excellent advice, being authentic to what is. You can still have a lot of enthusiasm, but especially post-pandemic world, it's all about trust and connection and human to human. So I really appreciate that. That's great advice. So thank you again, Holly. For everyone on the call, when you see this deck, you will also get a little bit more information so you can remember how to find Holly. And in addition, we also have our other sessions. I just want to call those out that are upcoming, so stay tuned. And finally, if you have any follow-ups or questions directly into Steve, who, if you've been to one of more of our sessions, he's been a part of. So on behalf of Steve and everyone else, I guess I'll close it now, Kate. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending, and we'll see you at our next Capital Education Series event. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.